welcome back to the program. Yesterday, we got not one, but two Kamala Harris media appearances, and it didn't go that well for Kamala Harris. One appearance, one interview was on NBC News. The other one was a CNN Townhall, and the reaction was not very good. Let's not waste any time. Let's move on to our poly-market election forecast. Donald Trump leading 62.7%. This lead keeps increasing. Last time we had a look at it, Donald Trump was below 60%. So now he's gaining ground as we approach the election. Almost a 2-to-1 favorite now. And it's going to become very difficult for Kamala Harris. If she cannot turn this trend around, it will be very bad for her. But let's not waste any time. Let's have a look at this NBC News interview.
Thank you, Madam Vice President, for your time today.
I'm glad to be with you. Thank you.
We were just talking about the campaign trail yesterday.
Yes.
And these key Rust Belt battlegrounds, as they call them, talking with undecided voters.
Yes.
You are reaching out that olive branch to these voters. You want to bring them on board. For them, for so many voters, we know that a huge issue for them is the economy.
Right.
It's the cost of living. I've been on the campaign trail. I hear that in the field again and again. You look at some of the numbers on this, and our new NBC News poll shows that more voters think that the Biden administration policies have hurt them rather than helped them. And I wonder, are the last 4 years an obstacle to you in this race?
Here's how I look at it. First of all, let me be very clear. Mine will not be a continuation of the Biden administration. I bring my own experiences, my own ideas to it, and it has informed a number of my areas of focus, most of which are...
So once again, we hear the common talking point. My administration is not going to be a continuation of Joe Biden. And every time she says, let me be very clear, she doesn't answer the question. Let me be very clear is actually a keyword to let me not be clear at all. But let's listen to her dodge the question, and let's see where she takes this.
Are, on to your point, lowering costs. I am traveling the country. I am very clear. Cost of groceries still too high. The voters know it. I know it. So part of my plan includes what we need to do to bring down the price of groceries, including the work I will do dealing with price gouging, something I dealt with when I was Attorney General, something I will deal with going forward.
And they keep coming, or she keeps coming up with this price gouging nonsense, as if price gouging was the problem. And it's sort of misleading the voters, trying to pretend that price gouging or price gouging laws are going to have any effect on the price of groceries, which is absolutely not the case. Price gouging is something totally different from inflation, and the problem is not price gouging, but they keep bringing this as a talking point, as if laws against price gouging or making stronger laws about price gouging is going to result in anything better for consumers when it comes to grocery prices, which is absolutely not the case. But they keep bringing this as if it was an effective strategy. But so far, we've seen that it absolutely doesn't work. It doesn't convince people, because the truth is, people are not that stupid, and the Kamala Harris campaign somehow thinks that people are so dumb that they don't understand the difference between inflation and price gouging.
Let me ask you about something that you said when you were running for president the last time around, back in 2019. At the time, you said that the elephant in the room was whether the country was ready for a woman and a woman of color to be president. So let me ask you, as you sit here today, do you think the country is ready now for a woman and a woman of color to be president?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I am seeing that in terms of every walk of life of our country. You know, I think part of what is important in this election is really not only turning the page, but closing the page and the chapter on an era that suggests that Americans are divided. What I know from personal experience, from lived experience, and from my travels even most recently, The vast majority of us have so much more in common than what separates us. And what the American people want in their president is a president for all Americans, which is the type and kind of president I pledge to be. This is my life's work. As you know, I started as a prosecutor. I never...
And really, this is the perfect example of the alternate reality that she's living in. She says that she's going to be a president for all Americans, as if Kamala was not the most devising candidate that we've seen, well, ever, to be honest. We've never seen someone attacking not only the opposing candidate, but attacking anybody who supports the opposing candidate with the type of rhetoric that, as we've covered on this channel, has been way out of line, way out of bounds. When you think of political rhetoric, we've never really seen, candidates attack the supporting base of the opposition in the way that Kamala Harris has done. And now she comes up with this idea that, oh, I am someone who's going to unite the country behind my presidency, where nothing could be further from the truth.
You've been reluctant to lean into, to talk about the historic nature of your candidacy on the campaign trail. Why is that?
Well, I'm clearly a woman. I don't need to point that out to anyone. The point that most people really care about is, can you do the job? And do you have a plan to actually focus on them?
I hear you on that.
And that's a very important point. And she didn't really answer the question, the original question of the journalist, that was, is America ready for a female president? And the answer is most likely yes, America is ready, but America is not ready for a president like Kamala Harris. America is not ready to put someone in the White House just because they are a woman of color. You can have a woman president, you can have a woman of color president, but you need someone who's competent. And just because you are the right identity politics is not going to carry you over the line. And identity politics is not going to put you in the White House. If you have the right gender, maybe the right ethnicity, it doesn't mean that you can forego competency and that you will be put in the White House for who you are or who you represent. You still have to be able to do the job. And Kamala Harris is not that person. That's the real problem that she's facing in this campaign.
That is why I spend the majority of my time listening and then addressing the concerns, the challenges, the dreams, the ambitions, and the aspirations of the American people. They deserve to have a president who's focused on them, as opposed to a Donald Trump who's constantly focused on himself.
And here she was again with the dream, the aspiration, the blah, blah, blah. It's like everything she says is so fake. Every single interview, and if you've watched some of our videos on the channel, you will see that she repeats word for word every single thing. Everything that she said so far in this interview is word for word stuff that she said in previous interviews. And she doesn't seem someone who is sincere. When you come with these sort of pre-written answers, and NBC News here, I have no doubt that she knew the questions and her answers were already prepared. She had prepped for this interview a lot. But when you come out and you say these things that seem so artificial and so, already prepared, then when you are on camera and when you're not a good actress like she is, it's so obvious that you're not sincere. It's so obvious that this is manufactured and that it's not really you. You're just saying things that you've memorized, but it doesn't show someone who actually understands the issues at stake and that is able to sort of improvise and have a conversation with a journalist. Here, we're seeing just someone who's a bad actress saying her lines, and it just rings so hollow.
Some of those voters that I spoke with at some of the events yesterday, for example, talked about they were there to support you, but also your agenda when it comes to reproductive rights and abortion access. And you have cast this as a matter of literal life and death, as an urgent priority here. If you win, it is entirely possible that Congress will be controlled by Republicans. So what specific concessions would you be willing to make in order to get something done on abortion access as soon as possible?
Well, first of all, look at what has happened since the Dobbs decision came down, a decision that is a direct result of the fact that Donald Trump hand-selected 3 members of the United States Supreme Court with the intention they would undo the protections of Roe. They did as he intended, and now in 20 states we have Trump abortion bans, which some make no exception for rape or incest, which criminalize health care providers in a state like Texas, prison for life for doctors and nurses if they provide reproductive care. And where we have seen this issue on the ballot, to your point about elections, from red states to blue states, when freedom is on the ballot, the American people vote for freedom, regardless of the party they are registered to vote with. We have seen that. And I know that there are members of the United States Congress who are well aware that their constituents are in favor of the very fundamental principle that a woman should be able to make decisions about her own body and not have her government tell her what to do.
Okay, so here she just talked for 2 minutes and again didn't answer the question. The question was, what would you be able to do? What would you be willing to do if Republicans have Congress to, sort of move the needle on abortion? And she didn't answer. And the reason she didn't answer is she has no idea. And this is the type of question where it's obvious that she's way, she's in way above her head in running for for president. If this was someone who actually was sophisticated, politically sophisticated enough, that person would be able to give you a concrete answer as to what steps, what actions they would be taking, either by executive orders or maybe try to negotiate with, some people in Congress, have an idea, of what they would be able to do if Congress is controlled by the opposition. How do you get to a compromise? This is not who Kamala Harris is. Kamala Harris cannot be a creative political force in this country because she has no idea. A question like that would have to be answered by her handlers, by the people who are running her campaign, by the people who are running the Joe Biden administration and the Joe Biden White House. But Kamala Harris herself, she has no clue of, what she would be able to do if she doesn't have absolute power. And if she cannot do everything that she wants, then she doesn't really know what it is that she can do and how it is that she'd be able to reach a compromise.
So is a question of pragmatism then, what concessions would be on the table? Religious exemptions, for example, is that something that you would consider?
I don't think we should be making concessions when we're talking about a fundamental freedom to make decisions about your own body.
To Republicans like, for example, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, who would back something like this on a Democratic agenda if, in fact, Republicans control Congress, would you offer them an olive branch, or is that off the table? Is that not an option for you?
I'm not going to engage in hypotheticals because we can go on with a variety of scenarios. Let's just start with a fundamental fact.
And so here's the perfect demonstration of what we were just saying. No compromise. But that's not politics. That's not reality. Politics is all about compromise. It's about reaching a consensus with people who disagree with you to try to move the country forward. And here you have a perfect example of someone who's fundamentally not politically savvy and someone who doesn't understand how leadership works. And all she can say is no compromise. So essentially what it means is that Kamala Harris cannot run the government unless she has all the institutions of government, unless she gets Congress and the Senate and then it's her way and her will, and she's going to do everything that she wants. But if it's not that, then it's nothing is going to happen, because you're facing someone who's so radical in their ideology that they're not willing to compromise anything, and someone who's so mentally rigid that they will not accept anybody having a different opinion. And that we've seen several times in the interviews that she's done, and how angry she gets when people disagree with her. This is someone who is so mentally rigid that ultimately it's an obstacle of her being able to be a political leader.
On the question of your beliefs, what you believe in, let me ask you this question very broadly speaking here.
Sure.
Do you believe that transgender Americans should have access to gender-affirming care in this country?
I believe we should follow the law. I mean, I think you're probably pointing to the fact that Donald Trump's campaign has spent tens of millions of dollars.
They're trying to define you on this.
Yes,
I'm asking you to define yourself, though. Just broadly speaking, what is your value? Do you believe they should have that access?
I believe that people, as the law states, even on this issue about federal law, that is a decision that doctors will make in terms of what is medically necessary. I'm not going to put myself in the position of a doctor, but let's also understand that Donald Trump is running tens of millions of dollars in ads to talk about two cases, to distract from the fact that his policy and plan is also to take away the Affordable Care Act, which provides health care for tens of millions of people in our country. That his plan is to undo the $35 a month cap on insulin, that it impacts millions of seniors in our country. That his plan is to do away with the $2,000 cap on prescription medication, the annual cap. That his...
All right, and here it's like, what the hell is she talking about? There was a question about, do you support transgender surgeries? And she goes on this sort of deflection, talking about the Affordable Care Act, insulin, all that stuff. And, you know, this is, again, sort of the continuation of this interview, where her deflection is just so nonsensical that you're wondering, is this person sane? Does she understand that she's having a conversation with a journalist who's asking her a question? And as the journalist has said, she says, I'm asking you this question so you can define yourself instead of being defined by your opposition in political ads. And instead of taking this opportunity to define herself, she just goes on this sort of tangent, this rant about, you know, Donald Trump being terrible and trying to take your healthcare away. But she doesn't answer the question, and certainly she doesn't help defining herself on that subject. And the reason for that, you know, you can think it for yourself. But of course, it's because her actual ideological stance is very problematic, because it is at odds with what voters in this country are thinking.
Down the cost of living. It includes dealing with prescription medication costs. It includes addressing the housing crisis and affordable housing crisis in our country. It includes supporting our small businesses, investing in American industries, and strengthening our economy.
I will move on, but I don't know that I heard a clear answer from you on the issue of gender-affirming care. It sounds like what you're saying is there should be something between trans Americans and their doctors. It feels like that.
That's hilarious. This journalist is like, well, yeah, we're going to move on, but you still haven't answered a single question in this interview.
You have made it clear that you believe this is a binary choice between you and Donald Trump. Those are the candidates on the ballot.
There's only
of course.
two choices.
Yes,
yes.
And I know that Joe Biden is not on the ballot. I understand that. But the reason that you are at the top of the ticket is because he dropped out of this race. And so I want to ask you, and it was largely because of that debate performance back in June. You defended him in the days before and in the days after as you were campaigning for another 4 years for President Biden. Can you say that you were honest with the American people about what you saw in those moments with President Biden as you were with him again and again, repeatedly in that time?
Oh, this is a good one. This is the one that sort of puts her in a difficult situation. Let's see what she answers.
Of course. Joe Biden is an extremely accomplished, experienced, and capable in every way that anyone would want if they're president.
And you never saw anything like what happened at the debate night behind closed doors with him?
It was a bad debate. People have bad debates. He is absolutely...
But that's the reason why you're here, and he's not running for the top of the ticket.
Well, you'd have to ask him if that's the only reason why.
What do you think?
I am running for president of the United States. Joe Biden is not. And my presidency will be about bringing a new generation of leadership to America that is focused on the work that we need to do to invest in the ambitions and aspirations of the American people.
It's a judgment.
Ambitions and aspiration. Every time she gets stuck and she doesn't know what to answer, she goes back to these, already pre-cooked talking points. And here it's another moment, where you see someone who just doesn't have the ability to, stand on her legs and just provide an answer that could be satisfying. There's a million ways you could, answer that question. And instead of doing that, Kamala Harris just doesn't answer. And the best thing that she can say is, I'm running for president, not Joe Biden. But, what we want to know is, how come if you saw Joe Biden every day and you knew that this guy was just completely out of it, why did you not say anything? And, that's the reason why you're here, is because we also, at the debate, Joe Biden, someone who's still, to this day, the president of the United States, someone who's not able to make any decisions, someone who's not able to even finish sentences, and you covered for that person. And it really, points to a flaw of your judgment as a candidate, as a potential president. If you are willing to lie to the American people about the person who's currently sitting as the president and he's not capable of doing the job, and you're not letting the public know, this is something that automatically will disqualify you from the job.
A question. That's why I ask. Can the American people trust you in these moments, even when it's maybe uncomfortable for Americans to level with Americans in that way? So that's why I ask. And it sounds like what you're saying is you feel like you never saw anything like that from President Biden.
I have worked with Joe Biden, hours and hours and hours over these 4 years, whether it be in the Situation Room or the Oval Office. I speak with not only sincerity, but with a real firsthand account of watching him do this work. I have no reluctance in saying that. No, of course I don't.
Madam Vice President.
And, this is probably the worst thing that she could have said. Oh no, you're all not seeing the truth, You saw Joe Biden at the debate and he couldn't finish sentences. He was falling down from the stairs, and he was just blanking out. He was waving, at random places, and he was on stage and he doesn't know where to go. Does he have to exit stage left or stage right? He's completely lost. But that was just in your mind. He was perfectly fine. He was actually the greatest leader that we've ever seen. And, somehow she thinks this is an appropriate answer. This is not an appropriate answer. This is the worst answer that you could give. It's just gaslighting Americans and saying, oh, it was all in your mind. Joe Biden was fine. Joe Biden was great. But we had to retire him from this race for no reason, or, a reason that only him knows, and we're not going to let you know what the reason was. No, everybody knows that they pulled Joe Biden out because he wasn't even capable of running a campaign. And if he's not capable of running a campaign, he's definitely not capable of running the country. And when you have someone like Kamala Harris, if what she says is the truth, if she can look at Joe Biden unable to finish sentences and she says, this guy is great at doing the job, then it automatically disqualifies her. This is someone who's not competent enough to even know what someone who can do the job is. And if she's lying, which of course it is the case because she knew that Joe Biden wasn't up to par, if she's lying, then, you know, it's a problem of trust between her and the American people. And if she thinks that she can just gaslight the American people and tell them, oh, what you saw on the debate stage was not true, was not real, and trust me, I know that he was capable. Well, that's just not going to go well. And I think when we're going to see the result of this election, then we'll see just how terrible of a job she did in front of the media, gaslighting or trying to gaslight the American people. And so far, you know, in terms of, you know, polling and everything, it really looks like the type of gaslighting that she's tried to do hasn't worked one bit.
And thank you for your time. I appreciate you being with us today.
Thank you.
Welcome to CNN's presidential town hall with the Democratic nominee, Vice President Kamala Harris. I'm Anderson Cooper. Now, in this room, we have assembled a group of 32 Pennsylvania voters who say they are still undecided or persuadable. All of them are registered to vote. Some cast votes for Joe Biden in 2020, others for Donald Trump. Some didn't vote at all, and for some, this is their first election. Many are leaning right now to one candidate or another, but they all say they have yet to make their final choice. Now, we found these voters working with a nonpartisan research firm, as well as business and religious groups, universities, and other civic organizations. These voters are asking their own questions tonight, selected by CNN to cover a variety of topics. You may see them holding a piece of paper when they're asking their question. It has their question on it. That is a question they have come up with. It has not been edited in any way by CNN. Thank you so much.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening.
Thanks so much for being with us. We're going to get to the audience in just a second. I want to start by asking you, though, for weeks you have been calling Donald Trump unstable, unhinged. You've called him dangerous. You've quoted General Milley recently, who called him a fascist. Today, you quoted General Kelly, who said that Trump repeatedly praised Hitler. Yeah. But there are tens of millions of Americans right now who have heard all those things, and they don't buy it, or even if they do, they're still going to vote for Donald Trump. He's arguably more popular now than ever. You have 13 days to go. What do you say to those voters to convince them? Because some of them are in this room.
Sure, and I thank you all for taking the time to be here. And you could be doing a number of other things with your time. So this really is proof that we love our country. People are engaged, Anderson, and really want to talk about the issues. And so the issue that you raise, yes, I do believe that Donald Trump is unstable, increasingly unstable, and unfit to serve. And I don't necessarily think that everyone has heard what you and I have heard repeatedly, which is the people who know Donald Trump best, the people who worked with him in the White House, in the Situation Room, in the Oval Office, all Republicans, by the way, who served in his administration, his former chief of staff, his national security advisor, former secretaries of defense, and his vice president have all called him unfit and dangerous. They have said explicitly he has contempt for the Constitution of the United States. They have said he should never again serve as president of the United States. We know that is why Mike Pence is not running with him again, why the job was empty. And then today we learned that John Kelly, a 4-star Marine general, who was his longest-serving chief of staff, gave an interview recently in the last 2 weeks of this election talking about how dangerous Donald Trump is. And I think one has to think about, why would someone who served with him, who is not political, a 4-star Marine general, why is he telling the American people now? And frankly, I think of it as he's just putting out a 911 call to the American people. Understand what could happen if Donald Trump were back in the White House. And this time, we must take very seriously those folks who knew him best and who were career people are not going to be there to hold him back. At least before, there were folks who we know what he would say, but they would restrain him. Imagine now Donald Trump in the Oval Office, in the Situation Room, He who has openly admired dictators, said he would be a dictator on day one. The former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff has said he is a fascist to the core. So I think that when the American people reflect, especially those who are undecided, on who you should listen to, don't take my word for it. In fact, go online and listen to John Kelly, his voice, talking about what he thinks of Donald Trump 2 weeks before the election. Because I think we all know, to your point, Anderson, it is close, but there are undecided voters who clearly, by being here, have an open mind, want to talk in a way that is grounded in issues and fact. And when they hear these facts, I think it compels a lot of people to be concerned about the future of our country with Donald Trump at the lead.
You've quoted General Milley calling Donald Trump a fascist.
All right, and here, I sort of let this opening monologue of Kamala run, and I think it's very damaging for CNN. When the show begins and he says, well, this is a sort of town hall that is in no way has been, manufactured to try to have some bias to it, and the people came out with their own questions, and CNN hasn't even looked at the questions. And then he welcomes Kamala Harris on stage and sets her up to go on this monologue, which, happened yesterday. And she did a press conference where she basically said exactly the same thing, word for word. And, CNN is trying to pretend that they're somewhat neutral, that they don't have this extreme bias, and that this is a real town hall with real people who are really undecided voters. And I think, when this election is done and we look back at it, I think the mainstream media and CNN, organizations like CNN, they will have a lot of soul searching to do. And they will have their share of responsibility in the failure of Kamala Harris, because they tried so hard to elect her that it actually became counterproductive. They tried so hard to stack the deck in her favor that ultimately they lost their credibility simply by doing that. They became so partisan that ultimately now we cannot see them as a neutral arbiter of political discourse. We're seeing now, Anderson Cooper here essentially being a sort of surrogate for the Kamala Harris campaign. And, I'm sure that she has rehearsed this monologue a lot, and of course, it's not the first time that she's said it on that day. She even had a press conference where she said everything that she said now. But this is not how you're supposed to start a town hall. You're not supposed to start you would open a town hall with maybe a question from an undecided voter from the other side, someone who's thinking about voting for Trump. But instead of that, then Anderson Cooper, who's the moderator, starts with a question that is not a question, which is essentially, a layup for Kamala Harris, asking her, oh, please tell us how Donald Trump is like Hitler, because another one of the guy who used to work for him and it didn't end up well for him, has said he's like Hitler. So why don't you tell us how much he's like Hitler and how much of a fascist he is? And when you do that, it just creates, absolute doubt to your town hall being a real event. Once you do that, then nobody is going to actually believe in anything that's going to be said after that. And in 5 minutes, they've just ruined the whole event.
Yourself have not used that word to describe him. Let me ask you tonight, do you think Donald Trump is a fascist?
Yes, I do.
And here it is, and basically after that, just one question, you can turn the TV off and say, these people are not serious. These people are not journalists.
My question is, as president, what would you do to ensure not another Palestinian dies due to bombs being funded by U.S. tax dollars?
So I will say, and I think this is to your point, far too many innocent Palestinian civilians have been killed. It's unconscionable. And we are now at a place where with Sinwar's death, I do believe we have an opportunity to end this war, bring the hostages home, bring relief to the Palestinian people, and work toward a two-state solution where Israel and the Palestinians in equal measure have security, where the Palestinian people have dignity, self-determination, and the safety that they so rightly deserve.
Okay, and here once again, like, once you have a first question like that and an answer like that, there is absolutely no way that you can look at this and say, oh, I believe this person is really an undecided voter and that Kamala Harris didn't know that question was going to come, when she's just doing a terrible job really acting out something that she's memorized. And of course, the form is terrible because it's obvious that this is not a real question and that this is all orchestrated. But when you talk about the content of her answer is also nonsensical. And, you know, she's saying it's basically fantasy land, saying, oh, we're gonna solve this with a magic wand. No, none of what she's saying is even plausible. And perhaps, you know, obviously this is manufactured, and the reason why this is the first question is because it's the most problematic issue for the Harris campaign, is that you have a whole segment of the left who is looking at what the Biden administration has done in regards to the Middle East, and they're not voting for Kamala now, and she needs to sort of convince these people to vote for her. She has just a little less than 2 weeks now to be able to do that. And perhaps she thinks that these people don't really understand the situation, and by saying, oh, well, now that Sinwar is dead, we can find a peace, when everything points to the contrary. Now, the position are going to be even more stuck. And Sinwar was, I believe, he was the lead negotiator in the so-talk peace talks or the ceasefire talks. So essentially, now you have the guy who was leading the negotiation has been eliminated. It doesn't happen because they're looking for peace. It happens because they want to stop peace. And so, in a way, it's almost disrespectful to the intelligence of her Democratic supporters. You know, she's just essentially implying these people are stupid. They don't understand the situation, but perhaps they know the situation well enough to understand that an answer like this is not something that's going to satisfy them. But who knows? I don't know the answer to that. I don't know the level of, you know, sophistication of her radical voters and what they truly understand about the Middle East. But, you know, if I was in her shoes, in Kamala's shoes, then I wouldn't underestimate her voters, and I wouldn't sort of think of them as stupid people who I can just give an answer that's completely in fantasy land, and think that, oh, I said that and now they're going to be satisfied, they're going to vote for me. I would actually think that this is, you need to go into the real. You need to have an actual answer to a problem. But of course she doesn't have an answer. That's the real problem, is that when everything you do is pretend, when everything you do is lie, then you have a real problem, because you cannot say the truth. And you know, that's one of the issues with her campaign. She cannot say the truth. She cannot state her position and the position of the Biden-Harris administration, because it is in complete conflict with the position of her voters and of the far left.
I want you to meet Beth Sandberg. She's a realtor, a mom of 4 from Bala Cynwyd, Pennsylvania. She's a registered Democrat, says she's undecided because of concerns about anti-Semitism. Beth?
Hi, thank you.
So once again, same question. Everybody here is undecided, but everybody's a Democrat, and everybody's everybody's thinking of voting for you, but they're not going to vote for you because of the issue in the Middle East. And once you see that, 2 questions in a row from the same subject, it's like a redo here for Kamala Harris. Explain us one more time in a better way what your stance is, and she's probably not going to answer.
Thank you for remembering we need to bring the hostages home.
Of course.
The rise of anti-Semitism and violence from anti-Semitism has risen greatly on college campuses and on our city streets in the last year. How would you combat this growing trend and protect our young adults?
Thank you, Beth. You are right, and I will say that we have seen a rise in anti-Semitism. It is something that we have to be honest about and we have to deal with. As Attorney General, I actually published a hate crimes report on a regular basis, and anti-Semitism was among the highest forms of hate in our country, and this was before October 7. And we know what we've seen since. Part of what we've got to do is talk with people so that they understand what are the tropes, what are the roots of what we are seeing, so that we can actually have people be more understanding. We need to have laws in place that make those who would commit crimes on behalf of anti-Semitism and hate, that they pay a serious consequence. We need to have the deterrence so that doesn't happen. We need to ensure that college students are safe in their school and feel safe to be able to go to class. But I'm going to tell you what doesn't help. Again, I invite you to listen and go online to listen to John Kelly, the former chief of staff of Donald Trump, who has...
And here, once again, she cannot give you an answer to anything except that, oh, Donald Trump is horrible. And here, Donald Trump wasn't in the question. Donald Trump has never been in any of these questions. And every time she doesn't answer the question that's being asked, and all she can go to is, oh, look at Donald Trump. And, if you're running for president at a time like this, where people want solutions to their problem, the problems that are affecting them on a daily basis, then your answer cannot be pointing at the other side and saying the other side is terrible. What people want is you to actually give solution or propose solutions that are convincing enough for people to say, oh, I believe this person can actually solve the problems. But here we have, in his totally artificial town hall, 2 questions back to back, and they're sort of opposed in a way, and they're trying to bring back in the pan-left coalition 2 groups that have essentially gone away for Kamala Harris. One group is the radical left who supports Palestine, and the other group is Jewish people who support Israel, and both of them are now upset at Kamala Harris and the Democrats. And it's sort of in line with the rest of, what we've seen from Kamala Harris in her media appearances, where she's never taking a stance on any issue because she thinks that by not saying what her stance is, by not taking a side, by not saying what her position is, then she's not going to upset anyone, and everybody's going to be satisfied, and everybody is going to vote for her. And it's exactly the opposite once again. And here you have these, it's sort of the problem of the left, is that it's made of a coalition of people who have interests that are totally opposed to each other. So here you cannot satisfy both sides. You have to pick a side. And instead of picking a side, here she doesn't answer any of the questions, and she's trying to deflect and make people forget that she doesn't answer. And that's not going to satisfy anyone, Are the people, after the answer that she gave concerning Palestine, are the people who are, on the left that are, took over college campuses and all that, are they going to be satisfied? I don't think so. And here, the other side, the people who were on the other side of that issue, are they going to be satisfied when she goes on like a tangent and randomly talks about whatever she did when she was attorney general and this and that, and talk about generalities, and instead of answering the question saying, oh, I'm going to do X, Y, Z to combat anti-Semitism, she's just going to go, on a long rant saying, I'm not Donald Trump and Donald Trump is Hitler. Well, ultimately, I would expect that both sides of this issue are going to be upset. And so instead of managing to convince at least one side to vote for her, now she's going to lose both sides.
This election in 13 days is presenting the American people with a very significant decision. And on the one side, on this issue of who is going to model what it means to use the bully pulpit of the President of the United States in a manner that in tone, word, and deed is about lifting up our discourse, fighting against hate, as opposed to fanning the flames of hate, which Donald Trump does consistently.
There is nothing that lifts the discourse and fights the flame of political rhetoric than calling your opponent Hitler. And that is like, you really have to have a problem looking at yourself and listening to yourself talking to be able to have this sort of cognitive dissonance where you're pretending, oh, I'm the one who's not divisive and I'm calling my opponent Hitler in the same sentence. That's absolutely insane. And I don't know how it's possible that her campaign has not rectified this. How can they let her go on like this? It's kind of pathetic, to be honest. Someone should have told her, hey, you need to tone it down. You need to focus on the issues. You need to focus on policies. The people who are convinced that Donald Trump is a bad person, they're already voting for you. You don't need to go out there and say, every single sentence that you say is Donald Trump is Hitler. We get it. Focus on something else. Focus on your qualities, perhaps. Or maybe she doesn't have any qualities. But, focus on policy. At least try to move the political discourse forward instead of being stuck into this childish argument that, oh, my opposition is Hitler. It's like, in terms of political sophistication, this is like childish argumentation. You cannot be a serious person and having that as your only argument.
I want you to meet Rob McPherson. He's the chief marketing officer for a local organization. He's registered Republican from Media, Pennsylvania, who told us he's leaning towards voting for you, but has concerns about what he calls shifts in your policy positions. Rob?
Thank you. Thank you for being here, Vice President Harris. So welcome to Delco.
Thank you.
Here in Delco, we pride ourselves on being authentic.
Yeah.
And much of what we have much of what you've been saying with regard to issues like law and order and fracking reflect a more centrist view than what people are used to hearing from Kamala Harris, leaving some voters to wonder about the authenticity of your current, more moderate positions. Can you talk a little bit about how your positions have shifted and why?
Sure.
And here, this is a very interesting question. Once again, not something that is believable. Once again, it's another layup for Kamala Harris to help her, answer this problematic issue that she has because of the flip-flop, because of the position she used to have, and that she's only changed in the last couple of months now that she's at the top of the ticket. And we're going to see what she is going to answer here. Let's just go and listen to her.
Sure, and thank you. So first of all, on fracking, I've been very clear. We kind of dispensed with this in 2020. I am not going to ban fracking. I did not as vice president. In fact, as vice president, I cast the tie-breaking vote that now has opened up more fracking leases. My value on the issue of what we need to do to invest in a clean energy economy and a clean energy future has not changed. But frankly, I now have the experience and perspective of having been vice president for almost 4 years. I've traveled the country. I know that we can invest in a clean energy economy and still not ban fracking and still work toward what we need to do to create more jobs and create U.S.-based jobs in a way that will be globally competitive. On the issue of law and order, as you mentioned, I think there's just a whole lot of misinformation, to be honest with you. I have personally prosecuted very serious crime. It's how I started my career. I spent most of my career as a prosecutor, not in Washington, D.C. And as my first priority, had and remains as a first priority to me, the safety of the American people. So that has not changed. And sadly, I think that there's a bit of misinformation, if not more than a bit. But I'm glad that you raised the subject so that I can address it. But
from the people who brought you, defund the police, now she's saying, you know, you don't understand actually what my position was. It's so, you know, is really taking people for idiots, thinking, oh, we don't remember what you used to be up to 2 months ago. You know, we've seen Kamala Harris now, she's been in politics for a long time, and her current position as a presidential candidate, they only date from 2 months ago. And these are new positions. And now she's coming and gaslighting people saying, oh, there's misinformation. You don't know what my stance is or used to be. No, you're on the record. We've seen you, and we've seen you say plenty of times what your position was. And now all of a sudden, you know, in the last 2 months, you have a general election. You need to be more of a centrist. And all of a sudden you come and you change your position. Well, you have to explain yourself, and you have to explain yourself better than that. You know, just saying to people, oh, this is misinformation. You don't know the truth. No, we know the truth. It's up to you to do a better job to explain. And you can do that in plenty of ways. You can say, oh, well, guess what? I've changed my mind. That would be better than what she said. It'd be better for her to say, oh, you know what? I changed my mind in the last 2 months. It'd be better than saying to Americans, you don't know what you're talking about, because nothing is more disrespectful and condescending than that.
Just, if you don't mind, just let me just finish. Because I think the spirit of your question is really important, and I'm glad you raised it. Our country deserves to have a president of the United States who is not afraid of good ideas.
And the essence of his question is, why are you a liar? And, you know, of course, she's going to have to do better than what she said. And maybe she realized here, and she interrupted Anderson Cooper. She was like, oh, no, wait, I need to. When they prepped me for this town hall, they told me I cannot just gaslight them. I have to say something better. Let's listen to her.
Does not stand on pride. If a perspective needs to be informed by different points of view to build consensus and to have a common sense approach. I'm never going to shy away from good ideas. And I'm not going to feel the need to have pride associate with a position that I've taken when the important thing is to build consensus to fix problems. I believe in fixing problems. I love fixing problems. And so I pledge to you to be a president who not only works for all Americans, but works on getting stuff done. And that means compromise. And it doesn't mean compromising your values or your principles, but it does mean working to get stuff done. And I pledge to you I will do that.
Just to be clear, though, what he's referring to, and you point out, too, when you're running for vice president in 2020, you were not talking about banning fracking, but...
No, Anderson, I pledge that I would not ban fracking.
Right, I know. You said you would not ban fracking.
Correct.
You know, you had said in the 2019 town hall, there's no question I'm in favor of banning fracking. In 2017, you talked about Medicare for all. You talked about 2019, you raised a hand in debate about if border crossings should be decriminalized. Are all of those issues, which those are not your positions now, are all those issues that you're saying through consensus and getting stuff done you have evolved on?
Well, no, let's take, for example, the issue of Medicare. My point has always been that access to health care should not just be a privilege of those who can afford it. It should be a right for all people. So that is why I have worked on doing what we have done to, one, allow Medicare to negotiate against the big pharmaceutical companies to bring down the cost of prescription medication. We've achieved that in terms of capping the cost of insulin for seniors at $35 a month, capping the cost of annual prescriptions at $2,000 a year.
And then again, she goes on misdirection. You know, look over here. Don't look at this question. Forget the question that has just been asked and listen to me talk about nonsense. It doesn't work. It doesn't work at a time like this. Maybe if the situation in the country wasn't that problematic, if everything was going great, then maybe you could be elected coming out with answers like this. But when people have problems and they want solutions, you cannot just misdirect and talk about other things rather than answering the questions. And here the question was, well, Medicare, you were for Medicare for all, and now you're not. And Anderson Cooper actually, he gave her a layup. He was like, hey, maybe, wink, wink, maybe you've evolved and you're trying to reach consensus here. And then she just goes on and rants randomly about, her supposed achievements, which are not really achievements.
And Tanisha Spall from Lansdowne, Pennsylvania. She works as an education administration manager for the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections. Registered Democrat who says she's leaning towards supporting you, has yet to make her final decision. Tanisha, welcome.
Thank you, Anderson. Thank you, Madam Vice President, for joining us this evening. I appreciate that you did acknowledge that we are a country that is faced with problems and issues. With the Supreme Court being plagued with issues, would you be in favor of expanding the court to, say, 12, so each justice has only one circuit court other than Chief Justice to assist in making judgments more balanced?
Well, to your point, there is no question that the American people increasingly are losing confidence in the Supreme Court. And in large part because of the behavior of certain members of that court and because of certain rulings, including the Dobbs decision and taking away a precedent that had been in place for 50 years, protecting a woman's right to make decisions about her own body. So I do believe that there should be some kind of reform of the court, and we can study what that actually looks like. But I do believe. But again, let's just, while you raise the point of the court, understand that, again, in 13 days, the American people will decide who is the next president of the United States. In 13 days, you will decide who is sitting in the Oval Office on January 20th. And on one hand, you have in Donald Trump someone who has increasingly proved himself to be unstable and who, as we have established and the people close to him have established, he is unfit to serve. Somebody who, on January 20th, you can be sure, will spend full time, like we know, and we've seen the image mentally of him sitting in the dining room off of the Oval Office, watching for hours as people violently attack the Capitol. You can be sure, because he has said he would weaponize the Department of Justice to go after his political enemies, that you can look at a Donald Trump in the White House after January 20th, sitting in that Oval Office, plotting his revenge. He has talked about the enemies within. We haven't even raised that subject, Anderson.
And here, once again, someone who cannot answer a question without invoking the name of Donald Trump and saying Donald Trump is Hitler. The question, are you in favor of expanding the Supreme Court to 12 justices? Her answer, Donald Trump is Hitler. You have to stop that. If you want to be considered a serious person, if you want to be considered someone who is fit for the job, then you have to answer the questions. You cannot, dance around to trying to, influence or sway the voters just because you're calling your opponent Hitler. And here you have someone who's, trying to pretend, okay, Donald Trump is the threat to democracy. He's going to destroy the Constitution. But then she also says, oh, yeah, I'm for packing the court. And we know the positions. That's the problem. The real problem, I think, in this election is that, Kamala Harris and her campaign, they don't respect the intelligence of the voters. They think people are stupid, people don't understand the issues, people have no idea, and we can just come up with sort of BS arguments to trying to sway them. We just have to tell them Donald Trump is Hitler a million times, and after that they will vote for us. No, that's not how it works. People want to have answers, and they want to know what your positions are. And this is, I think, the very important point, that when we will look back at this election, the obvious take will be, well, we had someone who never actually explained her position and her ideas. We have someone who spent her time, instead of answering questions and instead of explaining where she stands, all she did was call Donald Trump Hitler. And the more you do it, the less effective it becomes. Perhaps the first time you do it, people get worried. But after you've done it for like now, whatever, 8 years, well, now it's like, you call him Hitler, it doesn't work anymore. And what we want to know is where she stands on the issues. And on the issues, she never answers, and she never tells you where she stands. And when you do that, well, as we've said before in this video, people are going to expect the worst. And, how can you blame them? And to go back to the question here that is being asked and not answered, you have Kamala Harris who's saying Donald Trump is a threat to democracy and the way government is set up. And then at the same time, she wants to pack the Supreme Court and the positions of the Democrats. We had Tim Walz earlier in the campaign saying the Electoral College has got to go. And then he goes on, as we've covered in a video already, he goes on in front of the media and says, oh, well, that's my position. But no, actually, the campaign doesn't agree with that. It's not the campaign position. And my position is the campaign position. Basically saying, Americans are stupid. I just said something. I want them to forget it. And let's pretend that actually what I said is not what I stand for. And I stand for the opposite. Let's just erase what I said and what people caught me saying. And let's go back to what the campaign wants. Well, it doesn't work like that. We want to know what your position is. And if you state your position and then you go back on it and then you lie and say, oh, that's not what I meant, that's not what I stand for, well, nobody's going to believe you. And that's totally understandable. You have to be consistent in your position and in your messaging. If you want to have a chance to be elected, you have to convince people that your idea is the right idea. But if you don't explain what your idea is, then no one is going to be convinced by what you're saying. And here, to go back to the subject of, the sort of the way that government is operating, we have people who are saying Donald Trump is a threat to democracy and they want to destroy absolutely every institution of the government as it is today, more than the Supreme Court and the Electoral College. They also want to end the filibuster in the Senate. They want to add seats in the Senate for DC and Puerto Rico. They want to, of course, curtail the First Amendment and the Second Amendment. You have people who essentially are saying, oh, the other side is a threat to democracy and we are here to preserve democracy, but we're going to change everything about it and we're going to make something totally different from what it is. But you have to trust us that we're the guarantor of democracy. Well, she spent her time and she has said it in previous interviews. She'll say it again here that Donald Trump wants to end the Constitution. Well, if these are your positions and, how can you say that the other side wants to end the Constitution? You just want to remodel the Constitution into whatever it is that you like. That's not a position that is going to get people to vote for you.
Dana Bash, your thoughts?
Well, I'll just tell you what I'm hearing from people who I have been talking to, and that is that if her goal was to close the deal, they're not sure she did that. And, some people have asked, is she being held to a different standard? Maybe, but that's maybe the world that she's living in. And
And here, Dan and Bash here saying, well, she didn't close the deal. And no, she didn't. And then she asks, oh, is she being held to a different standard? And of course, the answer is yes. But they're going to pretend on CNN that she's being held to a higher standard than Donald Trump, when nothing could be further from the truth. She has never been, sort of confronted by the media the way Donald Trump has. And I think, this is also a problem when we look back at this whole political campaign that, will essentially haunt the Democrats. Is you've made the way so easy for Kamala Harris. She didn't have a primary. You hid her from the media for months, and then 2 weeks before the election, you let her in front of the cameras, and she has no media training. She has no ability to argument her positions, and she doesn't really know what she is doing. If she had, for the last 6 months, done the work and had media appearances, even if the media appearances in the beginning were bad, then she would have had enough training by now in the final stretch to be convincing in front of the media. But now you're letting her go in front of the media. She has no training, and of course she does a terrible job. And that's partly their responsibility, both on the media and the Democratic Party. They should have been more fair. They should have been unbiased. And maybe if they did so, Kamala Harris would have done better. But ultimately now, by, having softball interviews and hiding her, well, this didn't play out good for her. They wanted to help her so much that they actually hurt her.
I thought her drawing the contrast with Trump, something that she has been really trying to do in the last several weeks that we've seen, where she's gone after him as unstable, unfit for the presidency, saying he doesn't belong behind the seal of the office anymore after he suggested terminating the Constitution. She had a new angle for that tonight, and that's because of John Kelly, his former chief of staff, coming out with his on-the-record comments yesterday, saying he met the definition of a fascist and that he's admired Hitler. That was something that she was within seconds of taking the stage. And that first question from Anderson, where she said that, yes, she agrees Trump is a fascist, where she took that moment and tried to really sharpen it and make news out of it from where, she's been talking about this for weeks, but tried to draw that contrast even further for a lot of people, including the people in this audience who are undecided and maybe have not heard those comments or aren't familiar with what John Kelly has been saying. I thought it was really interesting that she came out of the gate, and that was one of the first things that she was talking about in the town hall.
Although, John,
and she couldn't be more wrong. And here we see sort of why this is not going well for the Democrats is the people that they have. And, here, of course, is a CNN anchor, but she's totally wrong about that. This is the problem. This is not something that adds to her campaign. This is exactly the opposite of what she would need to do. And, here I think they're trying to sort of come up with these viral moments, and they think, oh, we're going to take this 5-second clip out of context and it's going to go viral, and that's going to get people to vote for her. But perhaps what has happened here in this political campaign is that because the times are difficult, people are actually paying attention here. They're actually going down to the bottom of the issues, and having a 5 or 10 second soundbite out of context, it doesn't convince people. People want substance, and that's what they have been unable to offer. And just as we've said before, they don't realize that things have changed. They don't realize that this doesn't work. And perhaps the reason why they are doing so poorly is that it is among the Democratic circle the accepted truth that, oh, we just need to have a 15-second clip of her calling Donald Trump Hitler, and it's going to go viral, and people are going to vote for us because of that. And that's not how it works for this campaign. Perhaps it could have worked in other circumstances, but now with the issues that Americans are facing, now they want solutions, and name calling or things like that, just attacking your opposition is not what is going to convince people. People want to hear answers to their problems, and they want to have concrete policy solutions being proposed to them so that they can make a choice as to who the better candidate is. But essentially, you have one candidate that is proposing some things. Maybe it's bad ideas. Who knows? Maybe tariffs is not what's going to make the life of Americans better. But at least Donald Trump is proposing something. On the other side, you have someone who's just saying, "Oh, well, the other guy is Hitler," and that's not going to, if inflation is the main worry of Americans and the cost of living is the main worry of Americans, then no one cares that Donald Trump is Hitler, according to you and your unverified sources. You need something more than that. And, just what they are offering is just not going to cut it. I don't think so.
I do wonder, I think after 8 years of Donald Trump, people are aware of Donald Trump's persona, his proclivity for controversy, his potential to offend, and the like. And I wonder if you think maybe she did too much of what Caitlin's talking about.
I think that is a fascinating.
And here, what's his name, Jake Tapper, going along with what we're saying. It's like, this is not the way to go. She's doing too much. Yeah, it's not that she's doing too much today. She's done only that for months now, and this is not how you run a campaign. You cannot run a campaign on name calling. It doesn't work. And I guess he's someone who's more savvy, right? You have Caitlin Collins, who's just a junior anchor at CNN, and someone who's fairly young, and she think, oh, this 5-second clip is going to go viral. And Jake Tapper, who's someone who's more senior, he actually realizes, yeah, that's the problem, actually. And perhaps in both on the side of the media and the Harris campaign is that you have people who are running it. And, we know who is running the Harris media campaign. Well, these people they just don't have enough experience, simply put, to really understand that their messaging is just terrible.
I think it was a mixed night, okay? I think she was very strong coming out of the gate, and she obviously came with a purpose, which they want to shine a focus on, this latest chapter with the Hitler story of John Kelly, but generally anti-democratic behavior and the threat that represents. And she obviously was well prepared for that. She was very strong on, as she has been, on abortion rights because she feels passionately about it. She could be clinical on some of these economic issues. She was great on the long-term care for the elderly, to help people in the sandwich.
The anecdote about helping her mother put on her sweater and her final days.
The things that would concern me, and then she did one thing at the end that I thought was really important. The things that would concern me is when she doesn't want to answer a question, her habit is to kind of go to word salad city. And she did that on a couple of answers. One was on Israel. Anderson asked a direct question, would you be stronger on Israel than Trump? And there was a 7-minute answer, but none of it related to the question he was asking. And so, on...
And here, David Axelrod, noticing the same thing that we just said, she doesn't answer the questions. And instead of answering the question, she just goes on tangents and talks about other stuff for minutes. But it doesn't work. We need to have her stance. We need to know what her position is. If she wants to convince people to vote for her, she cannot come in front of the cameras, talk for hours, and then not tell what her position is. And here, David Axelrod, senior political commentator, well, he has enough experience to understand that and understand the flaws in her messaging.
Yes, I think that she is running into an incredible challenge this cycle of you don't want to alienate Jewish voters who are heartbroken after October 7th. They want the hostages released. They want a ceasefire deal. And then the Gaza protesters who are critical in Michigan, where you've got a huge Arab population. And I worry that the fear to answer either side of the question makes her alienate both communities. I thought that was one of the weaker moments.
And here again, you know, she is noticing exactly the same thing that we've said. If you don't state your position, then no one is going to be satisfied. And you sort of have to pick your side on this battle when you have two part of your coalition who are opposed and you cannot satisfy both of them. Then perhaps you have to make a pragmatic choice of picking one over the other. But if you don't pick any of them, then you run the risk of having both of them be upset at you. And I think this is what's going to turn out for Kamala Harris, is that on this issue of the Middle East conflict, she's going to lose both sides of the issue.
I think Republicans would take another hour of Kamala Harris. We'd just press play, let her keep going. We'd pay for another hour to let her keep not answering the questions. I think Anderson's asking her, well, why haven't you done it? You've been there for 4 years. Why haven't you done any of this? And the word salad answer she gave to that was just mind-boggling. I mean, it's blown up the internet, her answer to that question. I think the things that are troubling for people were her responses to, you know, Van said about what's she going to do to reduce costs when they asked her at the beginning. You know, we're hurting economically. She said, I'm going to prosecute corporations, right? That's not going to lower costs. Oh. How are you going to make things better for me? I'm going to prosecute people. Trump bad is not a message that's going to get her elected. Trump bad message. I disagree with you, Alyssa. There, I don't think it's going to happen.
You're referring to the fact that she kept bringing up the Hitler and Atlantic
you have to bring something else. Say, was she for a wall or was she against a wall? I couldn't tell from her answer, right? You know, Anderson kept asking her, well, listen. You laughed at the wall, but now it's in your plan. Are you for it or against it? There was so much mishmash in there. I don't know what was going on. I think it's very generous to say that she showed up, right? I think the key, if she loses here in this race, people are going to look back and her team is going to say, we should have been doing this from the very get-go because reps make you better, right? And the more you do this, the better you get. She's still not at it. We're 13 days out from an election, and everyone's hoping she's going to get better. The Wall Street Journal just came out with a poll while this was going on. She's losing altitude rapidly. Rapidly.
All right, and they cut it here. And of course, David Urban here at the end, totally right. And he's saying the same thing that we've said, you know, Kamala Harris came unprepared. And she was not prepared because she was not even given the opportunity to really flex her muscles and work at getting better at these media appearances. And now she's sort of being thrown in front on the big stage, and she's doing terrible. And ultimately, I believe exactly what he said. And you know what he said was pretty much what we said. But we will look back at this campaign, and if she loses, then, you know, I think it will not happen again, that the Democrats will pop up a candidate at the last minute, hide them from the media, and 2 weeks before the election, send them every single day doing a different interview and media appearances where they're going to do terrible. You know, you don't send someone to the Olympics without training. And here they've sent Kamala Harris on a presidential election with no media training. How was this a smart idea? How did they expect this was going to turn out? And the answer is not good. But let's see, because here they actually cut a lot of this town hall. They did not give us. Let's see if we can find some more here.
Do you see something in that? I mean, is that profound because it rhymes? I mean, look, she doesn't have to be...
I do think it was very well said.
She doesn't have to be flawless, but she has to give you something. I mean, she's like a true double threat. You know, she's terrible on her feet when she gets unexpected questions, and simultaneously, she can't even answer the expected questions. It's nothing, nothing, nothing. You'd think she'd be prepared to do this by now. You know, what's a mistake you've made? Nothing. What's a weakness you have? Nothing. What's the first law you want to pass? Nothing. What's a policy difference between you and Joe Biden? Nothing. Over and over and over. Empty, empty, empty. If she were an animal, she'd be a duck-billed platitude.
But look,
it's a total word salad.
What weaknesses do you bring to the table, and how do you plan to overcome them while you're in office?
That's a great question, Joe. Well, I am certainly not perfect, so let's start there. And I think that perhaps a weakness, some would say, but I actually think it's a strength, is I really do value having a team of very smart people around me who bring to my decision-making process different perspectives.
Here it is the Kamala Harris answer from The Office.
What do you think are your greatest strengths as a manager? Why don't I tell you what my greatest weaknesses are? I work too hard. I care too much, and sometimes I can be too invested in my job.
We have a couple of weeks now left, less than a couple of weeks before we get to this election night, and we're going to see now what the Harris campaign does. They are in total meltdown now. It's pretty obvious, and they're going to get desperate, and now they're going to have to they're going to have to bring out the big guns, so to speak, and they're going to have to do something to try to change this election, to change the outcome of this election. And we're going to see there's a lot of talks now about Donald Trump lining up to do Joe Rogan. If he does that, perhaps Kamala Harris will also do it. I think Joe Rogan would probably want to stay somewhat neutral in this election. And if he gets Donald Trump on his show, then he will want to get Kamala Harris on his show too. And if Kamala Harris doesn't appear on his show, then perhaps he's not going to get Donald Trump, because otherwise he would look like he's favoring Trump and the Republicans over the Democrats. So we will have to see whether that will happen. But I would absolutely love to see Kamala Harris on Joe Rogan for like 3 hours, talk about policies, because I think she's not going to do it, because if she was to do that, then it would expose her as someone who's simply not competent enough for the job. And I don't think her campaign is going to let her do that, because it would be the final nail in her campaign. But we will see what will come out of that. Anyway, thank you for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you on the next one.
Hit me with that like, and sub to the channel. Hit me with that like, and click the effing bell. Click that bit, alright. The algo recommends, for she gon' like. The algo knows you well. Hit me with that like, subscribe to the channel. Hit me with that like, and click the effing bell.